Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar, and I just wanted to get started. I'm also going to turn on my webcam just so you can see me as well as I'm going over today's topic. Hello, welcome. So we are going to be talking about caregiver support. So really what I wanted to do is just provide some logistical resources that we'll kind of go over at the end, but then also really some emotional, social support, and a lot of normalizing of just how stressful caregiving can be. And, sometimes we don't have the resources that we need or know who to talk to or how to process how we're feeling. So I wanted to just spend some time kind of going over all of that. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have some takeaways and some resources that you can help yourself with, as well as just a reminder of our contact information, all the things that Cascade can offer you and provide to you around caregiver support. So I wanted to get right into it here. One thing that I think is sometimes, a question that I think is important just to define up front as I'm going through the rest of the training, just in terms of today's training, how I'm defining caregiving in this context. So that would be adults or children with a chronic illness or disability and any elderly individual. I realize that caregiving is a broader topic, but when we're talking about today's resources and just kind of going over today's training, that's what I'm going to be focusing on in terms of how we are talking about caregiving in that context. So definitely just wanted to clarify that, but also completely recognize there's lots of different types of caregiving. So I don't want to reduce it to just that, but again, for today, that's really what we're going to be focusing on. All right, so some of this we already know, and if you are a caregiver, you are very familiar with this, but sometimes I just think it's a good reminder to just see kind of upfront all of the different responsibilities, and this is not also an exhaustive list. This is a list of common responsibilities, but definitely not all of them. And it is very time consuming, and we'll talk about some of the emotional labor that goes into it. And these are, I think, just reminders of, for many people, they are still working or working full-time, part-time, caring for others. There's all these different dynamics, and then also providing all of these responsibilities. So, and some of these may be relatable to you and some others are not, but it can be medical advocacy, prescription medication management, and also just the emotional support and the social support as well. So there's really those logistical pieces, the social emotional pieces, and our relationship with that person, and whether it's a family member or someone else. There's all these different aspects. And I think sometimes we forget, or probably as a caregiver, you have not forgotten this, we may not know how to navigate the medical system or some of these things, which is why exactly like I mentioned earlier, I'll provide you some community resources here at the end, because suddenly we're trying to figure out how to best advocate for the person we're caring for and navigate these new systems. And so just because we are taking on the role of caregiver doesn't mean we suddenly have just inherently all this knowledge about these things. And there's a lot of different challenging things to try to navigate when caring for somebody, definitely in terms of mental health, medications, and just what's out there and how to get support. So this, I think, is just a good reminder to, we totally understand as an EAP that this is extremely common. There are so many people providing caregiving, and there's oftentimes this big sort of disconnect between the amount of time and the caregiving responsibilities and our resources that we have available to us or know that we have available to us. So we want to do as much as we can to try to bridge that gap. So this really is just kind of an overview of what are some of these things that can come up for people. And it's totally understandable if you're not sure how to navigate all of it. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about the statistics as well. So 1 in 5 US adults are caregivers. That statistic is constantly increasing, and 30% provide care at least 20 hours per week. The other thing is that 58% are women, and there was another article that said 2 out of 3 caregivers are women. So we're really looking at this, and I'll have some resources at the end related to that as well, in terms of how many people provide care, and then what are some of those common demographics. And I don't think this comes as a huge surprise, but almost half have said that their career has suffered as a result of caregiving. And I think, we have provided this kind of brief overview on caregiver support and resources for many years, not just during the pandemic, but there are so many factors that have just increased the stress, logistical, social, emotional, all of these stressors, both for ourselves, for the person we are providing care for, the stress of income and jobs. We may have been a caregiver, and maybe based on the amount of hours required, we had to no longer work because our full-time job or almost full-time job was caregiving. But maybe the other person, maybe we're living with someone else who is working and providing income. Maybe they lost their job because of the pandemic. There's a lot of these stressors going on that everyone has had to navigate with the current system that we are in terms of the pandemic. So there are sort of pandemic related and not pandemic related reasons that it can be very difficult financially for our work and our job and who's most affected. So there's all these different layers that can come up where we want to be providing care for that individual, effective care. But for many people, they also like their job or don't necessarily want to stop working, but it's figuring out how to make that even possible. At the same time, they may have children, pets, like other caregiving that they're providing as well. So there's a lot of these things that are coming up. And as you can see on this last part of the slide, we're looking at this increase in need for paid caregivers, but just not the ability to fill those roles. And we're, I think, going to see a continuing of this type of statistic going up. So it just means more people are trying to figure out solutions that work for them, for their loved ones, for the people they're caring for. And it's continuing to be challenging. So again, we are here to support you as best as possible with a lot of these stressors. And if we're thinking about stressors, some of these, like I just mentioned, that work and financial piece, where sometimes we don't realize the cost that goes in or the logistics or trying to figure out, can I still work and how do I do this? And also provide caregiving, and sometimes and oftentimes the hours required as a caregiver change over time. So it may have been possible to work full-time or part-time and still provide that care. And maybe over time that individual needs a higher level of care. So we're then trying to figure out financially how to navigate that. It may not be possible to just quit our job and do that. And so all these different dynamics happening. Or trying to still work. And the other thing too, again, during the pandemic, maybe you are an essential worker and we're continuing to work in the community the whole time, or suddenly we're working from home, or already we're working from home. Maybe pre-pandemic you were working from home, and for other people it was a new thing. And so I know for many people providing caregiving, if they were an essential worker, there was all this added stress of, I'm going out in the community doing my job, but that puts me at higher risk of contracting COVID. And I'm going to bring that home, and this person may be elderly or be immunocompromised. And so all of these added stressors of, what do I do then? If I can't quit my job, but I'm still caring for this person. So there's all these dynamics, and there's also, again, there's stress around caregiving regardless, but if someone's in an essential worker position, there's a lot of stress in terms of their caregiving they're doing for their work, and then also at home. So on the next slide, I'll talk more about, what are some of the symptoms we feel as caregivers that can come up kind of on that emotional level. And just like it says here, it can be very emotionally tolling. We can care very much for someone and still find it emotionally tolling to be a caregiver. So both of those things can be happening at the same time. And the other thing too, and this is again pre-pandemic, but it can be a very isolating experience. I think a lot of times, that caregiving responsibility or the caregiving itself is happening in the home, and it's just, day-to-day tasks that aren't really being reimbursed the same as a job would be, recognized the same way. And so for many people, it feels they're alone in this process, they're stressed, they're tired, they want to not come across as feeling resentful or tired around the person they're caregiving for. And so we will sometimes further internalize how we're feeling, not know who to talk to or who to find support or really validation for the stress that it causes. And then there's also this time and work-life balance issue. So all of us really need that balance in terms of time for ourselves, for self-care, time with just restorative social interactions, which that, again, during the pandemic is a whole separate challenge for everyone. And so everyone has felt further isolated, and for many people, even more lonely just because of the pandemic. And then if we're also providing caregiving, it can be really challenging to feel like we have any space to ourselves or any, again, peer social interaction or a way to kind of decompress or, do something for ourselves. So there's a lot of those work-life balance issues where for many people, maybe they're still working full-time or part-time and providing caregiving, and there's not enough hours in the day to cook a healthy meal for themselves, have any self-care time, etc. And they can feel that way even if they're full-time just providing caregiving as well. So work-life balance, time, all of those things, stresses around that can come up regardless of your circumstances in terms of what your caregiving circumstances are specifically. So this is where it's really checking in with ourselves on what's coming up for us, because I think so often, and many of us do this regardless, but I think especially when we're in a caregiving role, is we'll often forgo our own needs, forgo our own emotional needs, social needs, physical needs, as we're caring for someone else. And over time, that can build up a lot of emotional distress, as you can see here, and then also impact our physical well-being. And we all know this, but I think it's a good reminder that we really cannot best support someone else unless we're taking care of ourselves too. If we get sick, if we're unable to support someone or it's hard to think clearly, we're not going to be very good at supporting somebody. So sometimes I really try to think about, and as a counselor, I talk about this a lot, of how do we sort of reframe the narrative a little bit, because a lot of times we'll feel this sense of guilt of taking any time for ourselves because we're just focused on providing the best care possible for this person that we're caring for or people that we're caring for. And I try to really reframe that as me taking care of myself is part of being able to better take care of them. And it's just small things. We do have really busy schedules. I'm not here going to say, start doing 2 hours of yoga every day. That may not be possible, in terms of a schedule. But even just small things to do to take care of yourself. And I'll talk again about some of the EAP resources that you have available. But the other thing too is to check in more frequently with yourself around some of these symptoms that might be coming up, because we tend to just be go, 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 just take care of everything, check things off the list, take care of other people, work if you're working as well, get all that done. And we're not realizing that we're building up this level of exhaustion. We're starting to have a lower threshold for empathy, sleep, or physiological symptoms, all this stuff. And then what will happen sometimes is that we're not really noticing some of that buildup, and then we end up hitting a wall of just, I am completely burnt out, I don't have any patience, or we get sick, etc. So what are small things we can do as much as possible preventatively to not only check in with how am I doing right now, what do I need? And it's okay to ask myself what I need to. If I'm feeling, some emotional stress, or maybe I'm having sleep issues, what are some things I can do to try to address those? And some of this is also being willing to ask for help. We, a lot of times if we're feeling kind of isolated already, or we're used to helping others, it's hard to then ask for help. So we'll try to take it all on ourselves. And that also is going to lead to a lot of these symptoms. So figuring out how comfortable am I asking for help? And sometimes if it's not super comfortable for you to do that, a good starting point is ask the EAP for help. We can do a lot of things to assist you, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that can be a good starting point of what does it even feel like to kind of, what if I was able to get even some of this off my plate, and even small things can help us feel empowered, can help us feel more balanced, that we're choosing to do things in a way that are best for us and this person or people we're caring for. Because the other thing that comes up a lot, and I see this a lot when I'm talking to people who are struggling with making sure that they are providing effective caregiving, but they are also in other relationships in their life. They may have kids, they may have other, family members, a spouse or partner. And a lot of times this level of, we're starting to struggle with empathy, we're burnt out from caregiving, we're tired all the time, we're more irritable. that's going to show up in other areas of our life. You know, we may be kind of pushing that down when we're providing care for the person we're caregiving for, because we don't want them to see that we're tired or burnt out, but then that goes somewhere. And a lot of times it ends up getting redirected to loved ones, partner, you know, other people. So that's another common symptom that we will sometimes find, is that we're doing okay with the person we're caring for, but the other people in our life, and that will then start causing stress in those relationships, with an add stress. It's this whole thing. So as much as possible, if there's any, you know, kind of one of the main takeaways from today's training is thinking, what do I need for myself? And it's okay to answer that. And part of answering that is so I can help others more effectively and just improve balance in my life and my relationships. And then, as we probably all know, and maybe you've experienced this or had to have difficult conversations, if we are caregiving and it's an elderly individual, it could be a parent-in-law, another individual, a lot of times it can be really difficult to have conversations, because there could be, you know, as I'd mentioned earlier, maybe someone had a certain level of mobility or independence, and over time, some of those things have changed, and you have some concerns about their safety, or, you know, being able to handle finances correctly, being able to take medications, all of these things. And this happens very common for everyone. And so as a caregiver, it can be really difficult to set boundaries and be compassionate at the same time. And on the next slide, I'll talk about some strategies of how to have those conversations. But this is another thing that can really help with the EAP. I'll mention this again later, but I'll mention it now too, is that you can always call our number, which that will be at the end of this slide deck as well, 24/7, 365. If you are, you know, thinking, I'm about to broach this subject with this individual, I'm not quite sure how to do it, or here's how I think they're probably going to respond, and I just want to talk to someone about strategies of how to bring this up, we can help you. You know, that's in the moment. You can just literally call anytime, because these are really difficult conversations. And part of it, this goes back to kind of the counselor side of me, is we'll sometimes wait and think, I don't want to have this conversation until it's not going to be difficult. Sometimes it is just going to be difficult. We have a lot of emotions around this. We want to be supportive, but we want people to be safe. It's a human condition to have a lot of anxiety and stress around losing any sense of independence or a sense of empowerment. And so that can be very stressful. And for many individuals who are having very valid anxiety about that, sometimes instead of saying, I'm feeling anxious about this, or I'm struggling with this loss of independence, those feelings sometimes get covered up with irritability or defensiveness, or, you know, a struggle with being able to receive that information effectively. And people of any age struggle with that type of feedback. So having those conversations can be really hard, because we, you know, I think care about these people and want the best for them. So again, on this next slide, I'll talk about some strategies for that, but also just remember that even with the strategies on the next slide, you may still feel, I need some added support around this. And there's tons of EAP resources that can help you with that. So some things to consider for having difficult conversations. I think this is where it's really going in with focusing on coming from a place of support and not judging that person. This takes us back to that earlier slide. And when we're talking about have the conversation at the most opportune time, I don't necessarily mean just for the individual you're talking to, but also for you. So if it's the end of the day and we are at our, you know, wit's end, it's not the best time to have some of these conversations. So doing your best to think, how do I go into this conversation when I'm in my most balanced, sort of logical brain state? And what happens a lot is that we don't do that because we're at our wit's end. You know, something happens that is sort of the final thing to remind us, like, this person really should not be, you know, driving anymore. This person shouldn't be in control of their finances. And then we just kind of get frustrated with them, and it turns into this more judgmental lack of support. So a lot of this is planning ahead, you know, tracking on things and thinking about, you know, how do I go into this from the most balanced state possible? The other thing too, and this comes up a lot, is you may be providing caregiving for someone yourself, or there may be a few different people providing caregiving for that person. Or if it's just you, there's other people oftentimes involved in some capacity, other family members living locally or not, who are still aware of kind of what's going on. And as much as possible, having the least amount of people involved in these conversations. I think a lot of times if someone's got a group of people all kind of coming to them at once saying you shouldn't be driving anymore, it can be overwhelming. It's easy to get overwhelmed and defensive and stressed, and then that conversation doesn't go as well. So really think about who's the best person to have this conversation. Try to have the least amount of people involved in that conversation just to reduce that kind of, dynamic that could happen there. Of course, every circumstance is different. This again is why it helps to always know that you can call the EAP if you're trying to even strategize at this point. Who should be involved in this? Here's the situation that's going on. What would you suggest? So because every circumstance is different, but this is just a general suggestion that can help just reduce some of that stress. And then really focusing on those I statements again. So this is where instead of saying something like, well, you definitely can't drive anymore, clearly that's not possible, I'm taking the car keys away. That is can lead to a lot of defensiveness, anxiety, a conversation that does not go particularly well. It's usually coming from a place of where we're at our wits' end. Again, we're frustrated. So this is where it's really focusing on safety and their needs first. So instead using language like, I'm really concerned for your safety. That's my number one priority. And I want to make sure that we create a plan to ensure that you're safe, but also feel like you have autonomy. And so here are my suggestions for that. And that's why I always think it's good and very important to go into these conversations with a solution in mind, because driving, for example, that changes everything. Maybe they were able to drive themselves and now they aren't able to. How are they going to get around? Again, this is where EAP can come in for some help. And I also have community resources on this slide deck too. But going in with a solution in mind, and instead of just saying, I'm taking the keys, you can't drive anymore, because anyone's going to have a spike in anxiety of how do I have a sense of freedom of getting around or getting to and from. So if you can go into that with, here's my plan for what we'll do to make sure that you have as much autonomy as possible, how we're going to work with transportation and figure that out. And I'm here for you, and here's what I think is going to work best. So that can really help with just going straight to what your suggestion is. So having a plan up front, not only just having a plan up front to have the conversation when you're in a more balanced state, when you plan up front, you also can go in with solutions in mind that can sort of shift away from here's what's not working to here's what I think will work better for your safety. And I talked about self-care already, but I'll talk about it again because it is so important. Again, we tend to forgo our own self-care, and it just really leads to burnout and compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue and burnout are kind of a Venn diagram. A person can feel burnt out regardless of the job they're doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a caregiving job or emotional support. It can just be there's too much work and not enough time. Compassion fatigue is when we are experiencing this inability to feel empathy anymore because we've just kind of hit our limit of providing emotional care for someone else. And so we can have both. Oftentimes someone feels burnt out and compassion fatigued. So I talked a little bit earlier about needs. And one thing that I find helpful, especially if it's either hard to ask for help or we're so used to thinking about other people's needs, we haven't even assessed what our needs are, let alone what would be the solution to them. So if you're not used to even checking in on what your needs are, I like to break it down into categories. So what are your physical needs? So maybe that may be getting better sleep, eating healthier, getting out and moving around more, whatever those things may be. So physical needs. What are social needs? Maybe you're feeling really socially isolated. You haven't spoken to anyone, just a peer, a friend, someone that you're just talking to about anything else, social, again, restorative social interactions. So that may mean I really want to in the next week reach out to someone and either schedule a time to on a call, or if it's safe to do so, something in person, and really kind of thinking about what are some of those social needs. It also may be that if you're living with other people, a lot of times it's asking for that space. So say you really need time to yourself at the house. or where you're living, and there's other people that you're living with. And sometimes we may just say, I need this 15 minutes, even just starting there, just uninterrupted to myself and thinking about, what are some of these social dynamics? Do I have enough space just for alone time? And it's okay to ask for that, to use those I statements and say, this is really important for me for balance and well-being. And here's my suggestion of how we're going to do that. Does that work for you? So thinking about some of those social needs, both with boundaries and restorative social interaction. And then that emotional self-care, this is where it's really important, because that's where that compassion fatigue can come in. If we're not acknowledging our own emotions about this, it's okay to feel burnt out. It's okay to feel tired. It's okay to feel frustrated sometimes. A lot of this is a lot of work, and this is where it's understanding, kind of like I mentioned earlier, two things can be true at the same time. We can care about and be glad that we're providing caregiving for an individual, and also sometimes feel really burnt out or frustrated or just at our wits' end about something. So we can have both of those things happening. And that's where a lot of times it's okay to validate how you're feeling. It's just figuring out how to acknowledge those feelings and process them in a way that's healthy and appropriate. And a lot of that's talking to a counselor and utilizing some of the resources that I talk about. But we will often, again, kind of push those emotions down and not acknowledge them, either because we feel guilty about them or we don't know how to process them, or both. So we are definitely here to assist you with that. And if you're feeling any of that stuff, you're not alone. And then the logistical stuff, this is where maybe you need to ask someone for help to do the grocery shopping, or pick up something from the pharmacy, or figure out some logistical things that you just have, there's not enough time in the day for you to do all of it. So that would be another thing to really think about. So with narrowing down needs, I think it can be helpful, because you can either, just write all those 4 words down and make a list of your needs in every category, and then think, where's my starting point with each one? So a good starting point is the EAP. So we provide mental health counseling, and if you ever, again, I'll put all of our contact information up on the last slide here. You can text us, you can call us, you can live chat through our website. You have access to free mental health counseling with a licensed counselor, and that can be individual, family, or couples counseling. That also can be in person, video, or phone sessions based on what works best for you. A lot of times people will say, I'm a caregiver, I work part-time or full-time, or I'm a full-time caregiver. There is no way I have the logistical time to drive to a therapy office, to go to therapy, be gone that long. So if that is a barrier to you, remember that you can utilize EAP free counseling for video or phone sessions as well, and that can help a lot with accessibility and just the logistics behind that. We also provide resource retrieval. So if you are looking for, say you may have been caregiving someone in the home, and they've been living with you, and they have now gotten to a point where they need a higher level of care that involves, nurses or doctors, that has gone beyond your skill set or your ability to care for that person, you can contact us and say, I'm looking for either in-home caregiving with individuals who are able to provide that level of care, or I'm looking for facilities for this individual to live at, just in terms of their needs right now. We can do that research for you. So we can look into options for you, and in 3 to 5 business days, provide you that list of what we found. And that's just one example. So resource retrievals are unlimited in terms of what resource you're looking for. And this is one of the biggest pieces, is I think a lot of times people forget that we do more than just the counseling. And a lot of times we either don't know what we need really, or we don't know where to start, or what is legitimate or not, and how, or we again don't even have time to find the resources that would help give us more time. So we can do that for you again. So definitely, if you ever are just feeling overwhelmed or don't know where to start with finding additional resources related to caregiving or anything else, contact us. We also provide free legal consultations with an attorney or financial coaching. There's all these different components to being a caregiver that, again, like I mentioned on that first slide, we aren't experts in the legal dynamics or figuring out, the medical field and all of that. So if you need assistance with financial coaching during this time or legal consultations, again, that's a great resource to remember is available as well. And I'm going to leave this slide up just so you have access to it, so you can screenshot it or save it. And obviously this will be, savable as you're watching it as a recorded webinar. But these are just a few of the community resources for caregivers. Again, of course, you have access to contact us if you need resources or help finding them, but you may also just want to look yourself or see what's out there or something you just may need right that minute. So I like to provide these resources as well so people have them. And there really are a lot of resources out there. Some of these are just overviews, some are related to the pandemic and particular resources during that time. So I wanted to provide a mix of different providers and types of resources available to you. Just as a reminder too, that you are definitely not alone. So all of these are great, just immediate resources for you and the individual or individuals that you're caring for. And this is just our final slide on all of our contact information. Like I'd mentioned, that 800 number is 24/7, 365. And you can call it for any reason, anytime. If you need to talk to someone right away, it's answered by counselors. And you can also text us if texting is easier than talking on the phone. You can text us at that number if you need to either set up services of any type, whether it's a resource retrieval or setting up counseling or anything else that you wanted to get set up. Also, we have tons of resources on our website. So you can go to our website and you can log in as a member. And there are a lot of ways that you can get just immediate resources and information through that site as well. And you can live chat with one of our counselors through that as well. So there's lots of different ways that you can communicate with us and get services. So hopefully this is just a good overview of providing you just a reminder that a lot of us are under a lot of stress. We're doing a lot of different things and we are here for you. We know that there's a lot going on for everyone and you're not alone. So if you need anything further from us, do not hesitate to contact us. And if you need anything, that is exactly what we are here for. So thank you so much for watching and take care.